Good morning, my name is Ruth DeBono. I'm the Coordinator of Horticulture here at Old Sturbridge Village. And today I'm going to show you how to do some grafting of apple trees. Here at the village, we're working on a project to restore our Davenport collection of apples. This is a really special collection of varieties collected by Mr. Davenport back in the Great Depression. He went around New England as part of a project with the Massachusetts Department of Agriculture to look at old apple orchards and monitor them for disease and potentially cut them down. And as he was doing this work, he discovered that there were quite a few apple varieties worth saving. And so what he did was collect Scion wood and meticulously graft that Scion wood onto trees. Here at Old Sturbridge Village in the 1970s, we took this collection and created a preservation orchard. And now it's about 50 years later, and it's time to restore this orchard. Our trees have reached maturity. They have been fruiting for many years, and now they're dealing with some issues, particularly a disease called fire blight, which is a bacterial disease, the bane of many orchardists. So what we're doing is going to take Scion wood, or we collected Scion wood from all of the trees that we still have remaining in our collection with the help of some wonderfully dedicated volunteers. And now we're grafting those trees onto rootstock and setting them up to grow out for the next few years. And then hopefully we'll be able to plant out all of those varieties throughout the village. So we're very excited. If you've ever done grafting before, you'll know that it seems like magic, but it's really some interesting science that's happening. You just need a few tools. There are some really wonderful new grafting tools that you can use, but the issue with a tool like this is going to be the diameter of your Scion wood and the diameter of your rootstock matching. So if you don't want to purchase a tool such as this, things that you'll need are just a nice sharp knife. I recommend a file. A sharper knife is going to be safer. You'll also need a nice pair of good clippers, gloves, preferably cut resistant, some tape, putty, of course a pot and some soil, your rootstock, Scion wood, and probably the most important thing are your labels. So we're going to be grafting a variety called Sutton Beauty today. So essentially, when you're grafting, you're taking rootstock. This was grown out at an orchard, and the rootstock is going to determine things like the height of the tree, the disease resistance, potentially, the overall age of the tree, soil conditions that it needs. Basically, this is going to determine the overall form and shape. The Scion wood is going to determine what genetic material is held in the branches of the tree to create the apple, right? So if you were to take from this variety, Sutton Beauty, the seeds and plant them out, you would not get a Sutton Beauty the next year. The only way to truly propagate a true apple so you get the same genetic material for years and years to come is to take the Scion wood. And that's because the layer in the Scion wood, the cambium layer, that you're going to match up with the rootstock, those will fuse together. And then it will continue to grow out and fruit off of these branches. So essentially, it's kind of like a cloning process, right? So when you're selecting Scion wood and your rootstock, you want to think about what your site requirements are. You want to think about what diseases you might have present already. And you want to think about the overall age and height of the tree. So here at the village, we're going for a 19th century setting, right? So we want standard or close to standard sized trees. But for us, those can even be a little bit challenging to maintain because they get very tall, even upwards of 50 plus feet. So the M111 rootstock that we're using right now is just shy of standard size. It's going to be roughly 80% the size of a standard tree. So that'll give us a little bit of leeway, but it's a great all-around rootstock for New England. Very hardy, works well, has some disease resistance for a few things, but overall just a really hardy rootstock. And then I chose today Sutton Beauty because it's a near and dear variety to my heart as it's my hometown. So I figured we'll do a Sutton Beauty graft today. So essentially, we're going to get grafting. What you want to do when you select your Scion wood is look for 3 buds. We don't want a large piece of scion wood when we're grafting onto our rootstock, because this is too much if we graft this onto our rootstock energy for our young tree to try and grow out and maintain. So we're going to select probably 3, no more than 4 buds, just a couple of inches. So what I'm going to do first is put my gloves on, because you'll see in a moment it gets a little crazy. So first things first, I want to cut my scion wood. I'm doing something called a cleft graft. And so I'm just going to expose the cambium layer. So I'll show an up-close image of this as well. But when you expose the cambium layer, you can see it's a beautiful little green layer around the outside of the inner wood. That's where the genetic material and all the growth hormones are. So we really want to make sure that that matches up with our cambium layer on the rootstock. So I'm trying to cut as smoothly as possible. I sharpened my knife first before I started this, so that way I knew I could get a nice clean cut. And if I'm doing a lot of trees, I'll sharpen my knife multiple times, because we really don't want to damage, those tiny cells. We want them to be nice and clean, so that way they match up really well in the cambium layer. So you can see there, just a nice thin piece. And I'm just going to trim off the end, because that was the drying out bit that was originally cut. And now I want to shorten my rootstock. So I have 1, 2, 3 buds here. I'm sorry, my scion wood, not my rootstock. So I'm just going to clip above the 3rd bud there. And I could probably get another bit of scion from this. So I'm going to take from just below this bud and do another cutting, so that way I can do 2 grafts here. Okay. That looks pretty good. So the next thing is trimming up my rootstock. So again, thinking of what this tree is going to look like when I go out to plant it. If I were to graft the scion wood all the way up here, which you could do, it's a lot of tissue for this small amount of rootstock or small amount of root to grow out on. So it's a good idea to reduce it just to give it some more vigor. But say I plant this out and the scion wood is up top, all of this is going to be rootstock, right? So my graft union will be quite high. So I'm actually going to trim it back to down here, so that way when I actually plant this tree out in the soil, my graft union is pretty close to the soil level as well. So you really only need a couple inches. That should do it. So now the tricky part with this type of graft, and this is really why you need gloves and a sharp knife, is to make your incision in the rootstock, and I do this slowly. And essentially what I do is use my cut-resistant gloves as a stopper, where I just rock my knife carefully back and forth in, very slowly, and I use my thumb and my pointer finger as my guard so that I don't go down too far and split the rootstock. So that's about it. It's a very small incision, and sometimes what I do now, just to make sure, it's maybe about 1 inch long, just to make sure it's nice and open, because it's tight, right, is I use my knife to hold it open, and then I wedge my rootstock in just a little bit. Oh. Sometimes it takes a couple tries. There we go. I wedge my rootstock in. And now what I'm looking for is to really line up the cambium layers. So this is the part where it's kind of magic, because we're dealing with just a small bit of cell material, right, that we're lining up, and that's going to create a new apple tree, which is just so exciting. It doesn't take much. It's kind of a miracle. And so even if I can't get, you might be able to see, but my 2 diameters are not quite equal. So if this was a little bit thinner, I could take scion wood and do another graft here if it would fit. But I don't think that's going to work for this one, so I'm just going to focus on really matching up this side very, very carefully on my cambium layers, and that should do it. I'll take a little bit of putty, and I'm just going to fill in the side that doesn't match so it doesn't dry out too much. Don't want to use a lot of this because it could, trap things instead. And then we'll take some tape and wrap it around. This tape is really nice because it stretches out while you use it. So this will last me forever. And that's that. You can also cap off the top of your Scion with a little bit of putty too if you're very concerned about drying out. Which mine looks all right. You want green, right? Green and moist. Okay, now we're potting up. I just have a very typical soil. A native soil is really nice, right? We don't want soil that's too high in nitrogen or any organic material because we're not trying to encourage us to have really active root growth that outgrows this pot too quickly or, kind of exhausts the plant. So we want this to be soil that's similar to what it's going to go out into when we actually plant the trees out. We don't want to trick the roots and get a bunch of weak growth on them. We'd rather have slow and strong growth with a good cell structure. So my soil's kind of frozen because I left it outside. So I've got some nice soil in here. I'm just going to pot this up. Right, I want to cover the roots so that way we end up with a nice sturdy union, and that's about it. After you pot up your soil or your graft, you really want to make sure you label it. So the most important thing to do is write a label out with Sharpie on something that is waterproof. Some people will say also maybe even use pencil, and then in our case, we did a whole recording and have an Excel spreadsheet of all the grafts that we took so that way we know exactly what genetic material we took from each tree and what we can save for years to come, right? Just being organized is really crucial with this because if you don't label them right away, you're never going to know until you get fruit. And for a tree on M111 rootstock, that could be quite a few years down the line, at least 8 or 9. So you'll be waiting a while to figure out which tree you actually ended up with. So that's just a little bit about grafting. I'm going to go ahead and finish up the rest of these, but thank you so much for watching.